Okay, let's review what we talked about in class yesterday. When we have two linear equations, we can tell if those lines will be parallel lines, if they have the same slope, or perpendicular lines, where they would have opposite reciprocal slopes. And that meaning if you have a fraction and you flip it upside down, and then one of those slopes would be positive and one is negative. We would call those opposite reciprocal slopes. And then of course sometimes we'll get two equations of lines that are neither parallel nor perpendicular. So I've got a few equations for us to practice. The first pair of equations, y equals negative 1/4 x and y equals 4/5 minus 5. Are those two lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, let's look at the slope of both lines. We know the slope is the number that's in front of x. We've got negative 1/4 and then positive 4. Are they opposites? Yeah, we've got one negative and one positive, so they're opposites. Are they also reciprocals? The reciprocal of 1/4 is 4, so that means that those are definitely perpendicular lines. Let's look at another. Y equals negative 2/5 x plus 3. Y equals 2/5 x plus 8. So this one can be a bit tricky. Don't let it trip you up. Are those two lines parallel lines, perpendicular lines, or neither? Well, what's the slope of the first equation? It's negative 2/5, right? And the slope of the second equation? Positive 2/5. So I can't say that they're parallel because they don't have the same slope. One's negative and one's positive. So if one's negative and one's positive, that might make me think, hey, are they perpendicular? Well, no, because they're not reciprocals. These two lines are neither parallel nor perpendicular. How about 3x minus 7 and 3x plus 1? Are those two lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, each line has a slope of 3. And so if they have the same slope, then we know that they're parallel lines. Now, here are a couple of special equations. Y equals 5 and y equals negative 5. There's no x there. So when I graph those two lines, would they be parallel lines, perpendicular lines, or neither? Well, both of those lines would be horizontal, and so they would be parallel lines. Well, here we've got two, let me get my card. There we go. We've got two x equals equations this time. We've got x equals 4 and x equals negative 6. Now keep in mind a second ago when we had two y equals equations that both of those lines were horizontal and they were parallel. So would these two be parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Both of those lines would be vertical lines and they too would be parallel, just like the last pair. So here we have a y equals 4 and x equals negative 1. Would they be parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, you see, one's horizontal, one's vertical. So when they cross each other, they create a 90-degree angle. They're perpendicular lines. Now, let's look at an equation that's written in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form, and another equation that's written in standard form. Now, when we get that equation that's written in slope-intercept, it's really easy. We just look at the number in front of x, there's our slope. But when we've got standard form, we have a little math that we have to do first, don't we? So, after you change this equation from standard form into slope-intercept form, you find out the slope, and then you will be able to tell, are those lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, I always have to start out by moving my x. So I subtracted 6x. Now, I've got a number in front of y, don't I? Negative 10. So I should divide by negative 10. Negative 6 divided by negative 10. That simplifies down to positive 3/5, doesn't it? And I made a mistake on that card. Let me correct my mistake really quickly, if you will. Positive 10 divided by negative 10, that should give us a negative 1. My apologies. Now, why do I have written neither here? They're reciprocals. I've got 5/3 and 3/5. Aren't those reciprocals? They are, but they're both positives. We have to have one positive and one negative if they're reciprocals, so they can't be perpendicular lines. Here's another pair of equations. One's written in slope-intercept form, and the other equation is written in standard form. Would those two equations represent lines that are parallel or perpendicular or neither? Well, they're parallel lines, but let's talk about y. Now, the first equation, y equals negative 4x, plain and simple. The number in front of x is negative 4, so there's our slope. But when we're looking at 8x plus 2y equals 14, we have to change that standard form to slope-intercept. Always start by moving the x. That's always the first step when we're going from standard to slope-intercept. So we move our x, and then I always say that then we divide by the number that's with y, the coefficient of y. So when I divide by 2, I get negative 8 divided by positive 2 is negative 4. 14 divided by 2 is 7. Well, what's the slope on this equation? Negative 4, just like this one. It looked a little tricky. It looked like there was a lot to it, but it wasn't too much. The slope is negative 4, so those are parallel lines. Next we have y equals x minus 3 and x minus y equals 8. Slope-intercept form, standard form. So before you can decide which one they are, parallel, perpendicular, or neither, then you'll need to change the second equation into slope-intercept form. Once you do that, are they parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, there's not a number in front of x, correct? Well, there is one. We don't see it. It's a positive 1. So the slope in that first equation is positive 1. Now in our second equation, I'll start out by subtracting my x, which gives me negative x plus 8 on the right-hand side. Don't lose the negative that's in front of that y. That's a really common mistake. So now I've got negative y equals negative x plus 8. I don't want to know what negative y is. I have one more step. I have to divide by negative 1. So now y equals negative x divided by negative 1, positive 1x. And 8 divided by negative 1, negative 8. So what's the slope of that equation? Now it's easy to see that the slope of that equation is 1, just like our first equation. They have the same slope, parallel lines. You guys are getting good at this, right? You're feeling better about it? Y equals 1/3 x plus 9. X minus 3y equals 3. Are they parallel lines, perpendicular lines, or neither? I'm going to fast forward. I'm almost out of time, guys. M equals 1/3. M equals 1/3. Subtract the x, divide by negative 3, and we get that the slope is 1/3, positive 1/3. So those lines are parallel.